So thank you, Brian, for that kind introduction. It's quite pleasant and surprising actually to have someone introduce you as a man who needs no introduction and then not to be given one. For those of you who don't know me or haven't heard my name, a little bit about me. I studied both electrical and mechanical building services engineering as an undergraduate many years ago, back in the 80s, and at that time there was a lot of concern about the environment. It probably was at its peak, and I became quite interested in how engineering could solve these problems as well as cause a lot of the issues, particularly with ozone depleting CFCs we had in both aerosols but also in engineering plants such as refrigeration, the old R12s, and now the R22s, which have been phased out. And so much so I went on to do postgraduate in climate change and sustainable development, as well as behavioural science and psychology, which I found particularly interesting, the way that we as human beings, so-called intelligent human beings, interact with the built environment and our natural environment as well. So I came to a point when I sort of became this very odd hybrid chartered building engineer and a chartered environmental scientist, and no one really knew what to do with me and what my role was. And so I became a consultant, and 12 years now I've been working on various different projects as a sustainable development specialist, including work with London Underground, which I'll come to towards the end of this presentation. Now, if any of you are interested in talking to me about any of the items, projects or ideas that I suggest, do please email me. It's a general email address at my practice, which is info@sustainablebuildings.co.uk. You can see in the bottom hand corner here, it's info@sustainablebuildings.co.uk. Now, this presentation is called Successful Approaches for Changing Occupant Behaviour. It's quite a big subject, so do please understand this is just a small window into it. I don't want you to get the impression that it's just a soundbite for going away and suddenly making decisions on how to interact with facilities managers, building managers. Now, environmental problems, climate change, deforestation, pollution, we know these are all man-made. No one disputes this. These are man-made issues. But it's very surprising to see that many clients in the built environment, building industry, construction, as well as academics, find it difficult to deal with this. Who actually takes this on? This idea that we have to change behaviour. Normally in building projects, it's the architect, and there'll be a human factors consultant maybe brought in. But there's very few people that actually use psychology or behavioural science to deal with this. And that's because this is a fairly new thing. Sustainable development has been banded around, since the 80s, but no one's actually said I'm a sustainable development specialist dealing with behavioural science. And that's because it's a new discipline within psychology. Environmental psychology is very different. This is called conservation psychology, and it's the term given to how we as individuals, as human beings, as in groups, interact with the built environment and the natural environment in terms of sustainable development. So why would someone in the street put solar panels on their roof, for example? Why would someone next door always recycle when there's no benefit to them? So why do we need to change our behaviour? So when I'm talking to clients, when I'm running workshops, some of the reasons that come out, I ask, why do we need to change our behaviour? Oh, it's something to do with being green, or the company has to do it because they'll get fined if they don't. Or it's because of the economy, the energy prices are going up, we have to change our behaviour. It's very interesting because actually there's only one reason why we need to change our behaviour, and that is climate change. Climate change mitigation, not adaptation, that's a different idea. Climate change mitigation, that's climate change due to our own input onto the planet. Anthropogenic climate change. Very different to naturally occurring climate change, which you may hear being used, that the planet is naturally cooling, it naturally heats up. This is not naturally occurring, this is what we do, anthropogenic. And this is the reason that we need to change our behaviour. And when I get introduced to clients, they will come and say to me, David, we've got this new project, this new initiative. It's a low carbon drive, or we're calling it the 2020 challenge or the 2050 challenge, about how we're going to approach business in the next few years. And this is great, but what I've found is that when used in isolation, these terms can really have a negative impact. And there can be a lot of scepticism about who's really making the benefits from this. And I'll talk to a general member of staff. Now, he may work in a loading bay, he may be a blue collar, white collar worker, and he's normally under a bit of pressure, he's normally working quite hard. And I'll say to him, right, we're going to have to make some changes, you need to change your behaviour, you're going to have to start doing things differently. And the attitude will be, I have to make all this extra effort. Yes, I've got to turn off lights, I've got to turn off machinery, I've got to start putting more effort in. And why do I do this? It's so the company makes more profit, they have less overheads, and then the bosses get a nice fat bonus. And he's probably right. There may be incentives for bosses to, or middle management to make changes, but it's not about that. It's not about whether you're an incentive or whether you're on a bonus scheme. It's actually about reducing the energy consumption of that transformer, that substation, that power station that's 100, 125 miles away. Yes, and there may be benefits to you. You may get incentives, you may get lower operating costs in your department, and therefore you may make some money, and the business may make money, and they can reinvest that. So we say to them, okay, we want you to embrace this new environmental initiative we've got. And they say, okay, what's it about? Why are we doing it? So they're dubious about the hidden motives behind. Is it just a way of making more profit for the shareholders? Is this new policy really just about greenwashing with no real commitment to climate change? You might get someone in a loading bay who's been told to turn machinery off and act differently, and he's told his supervisor that all this recycling never gets picked up and it ends up getting put in the waste bin because it's overflowing. These people are unlikely to embrace change. If management are also insensitive to the extra workload, if now you have to behave differently, which puts more emphasis, more energy into your job, makes you having to work harder. So I'd ask you, what is today's public perception of climate change? Are we now more concerned or less concerned? Well, this is a Murray poll that was taken back about 3-4 years ago now. And you can see quite clearly, back in mid-2006, out of 20 people, most of them, about 18 people, would be extremely concerned. So where are we now? 2010, 2014? It's about 5. 5 out of 20 people are concerned. And, well, okay, the economy's picking up a little bit at the moment, but this is probably down to the fact that people are more concerned about other things, more concerned about the price of energy, more concerned about the cost of living, more concerned about keeping their job. So they're less concerned about climate change. You can see that 2005, 44 people were very concerned over climate change. 2008, 30, 2010, 28, 2014, even less. This is the big thing, that public scepticism over climate change. Well, there's been a few things in the press about emails banding around climate change isn't really happening. Some books even, The Sceptical Environmentalists by a well-known Swedish author. And this idea that politicians make a fuss in order to distract us about climate change, so we can be looking and worrying about climate change while they put some extra taxes in. So climate change, why are people not driven to act on it? And there's 3 clear reasons I would give you. The problem is long term, so it can't be fixed tomorrow, it can't even be seen. It's largely imperceivable. They can't look out the window and see climate change happening like it would be raining or it's a sunny day. And of course the science is complex. Most people would say, well, how can the planet be warming? It's absolutely freezing. And look, lovely warm summer's day. Climate change is actually a result of all kinds of different sciences. And how can we perceive it? Well, we can't. It's very difficult. It happens over a long period of time. But you will get wetter, warmer winters. You may get more erratic weather patterns. You may get hotter summers, but not necessarily all the time. How can we do that? Well, there's some clear facts. A UK citizen is probably responsible for about 10 tonnes of CO2 per year that they emit. And that needs about 5 hectares of land to support. Now, these figures probably don't mean much. Most people understand 5 hectares. Well, I've never, what's that, a football pitch? I don't get it. Until you understand that 10, 13, 14 years ago, each one of us was using 21% more resources than we actually have on the planet. So in business terms, we're spending more than we've actually got. Quite clearly, we can't go on. Something has to change. Most people feel like making a cup of tea is a right, and they're entitled to make a cup of tea. Black tea, about 21 grams of CO2. White tea, about 53. White tea, you're boiling twice as much as what you need normally. No one boils the exact amount of hot water they need to make a brew. So even if you were having 4 carefully boiled mugs of tea, white tea per day, you would be the same as driving 60 miles per year. And that is 1%, just 1% of your 10-tonne lifestyle, which is already unsustainable. So we talk about behaviour. Someone's got good behaviour, someone's got bad behaviour. What type of behaviours are there? Well, there are 4 different types. There's cognitive behaviour. That is your conscious mental state. which stems from your attitude. Your behaviour is driven by your attitude, your cognitive behaviour. Now, fraudulent behaviour, most people have heard of things, they'll suggest something without actually thinking they've said it. And this is attributed to unconscious mental state, for example, childhood ideas or experiences. Humanistic behaviour is your personal desires, your desire to fulfil an experience. And this is an interesting one, evolutionary behaviour. This is attributed to experiences from previous generations. For example, our survival instinct, the way that we behave because we want to survive. And it's important that if we do any kind of initiative, that we address all these types of behaviour. I'm going to take you now to what is attitude. And I think this is key. Attitude can be expressed in 3 different ways, and what we call worldviews. As someone with an egocentric worldview would normally prioritise themselves before they prioritise anything else. So the world revolves around them, what they can get out of it. Now, they may take advantage of someone to make themselves feel better, or get an advantage in business or in personal life. Someone with a homocentric worldview would prioritise human interests. For example, they see human beings as more important. Not always. They may see animals or environment as equally important, but generally they would see humans as the most important. And people with a biocentric worldview place a very high value on non-human, so animals, trees, ecology, fungi, that kind of thing. And they live their world, live their life according to that mantra. As someone who's typical of an egocentric worldview would be the character from the 80s film Gordon Gekko, who's only interested in making money and he's quite happy to tread on whoever's in his way to get there. And you have to, of course, when we're dealing with building occupants, everyone is going to be different. We could have 3 different types of worldview working in a 3-man department. How do we make those overall changes? Well, there's just one. It goes back to Tony Blair's old mantra of education, education, and education. And from educating ourselves, the aim is to create environmental significant behaviour, what we refer to as ESBs. And this is a common term within conservation psychology. It's often referred to. And an ESB isn't someone doing something to make money. It's not someone who's picking up recycling because they can sell it. Not someone turning off light switches because they can save some money in doing so. It's someone doing these things, yes, but because there's no perceived benefit to them, only doing it to mitigate climate change. And this is the important factor, that environmental significant behaviour is acting on climate change. So how do we create ESBs? We're asking a lot. We're asking people to do things not because they get benefit, but because of climate change. Well, first of all, we need to increase understanding of the problem. What is the problem? Anthropogenic climate change. We need to mitigate it. So people need to understand what climate change is. We need to create organisational policy and acceptance. There's no point middle managers talking about climate change if we can look out the window and we can see bosses driving huge great cars and not really giving a damn. We need to identify and remove any barriers to ESBs and create positive social norms And then we need to have that feedback loop. We need to understand what's happened and review. Now, there are different influences to creating environmental significant behaviours, ESBs. Some are psychological, so what you believe, you are believing it's happening, you value, you need to contribute, and it starts to become a social norm. If it's contextual, can you make those changes? If you've got lights on, are you allowed to turn those lights off? Are you allowed to start taking the recycling out of the waste bin and putting it into a different recycling bin? Personal capabilities. Do you know how to operate that machine? Do you know how to turn that piece of equipment off? And then last, is it habit? It should be a positive influence for an ESB. Eventually, is habit. It happens naturally. You see something on that shouldn't be, you switch it off. You go out of your way to do it. You see some tap on, you don't want to waste water, you naturally turn it off. So we've made all this effort, we've got people to understand about climate change, we've introduced positive norms, we've got rid of negative social norms, but will people then change when they understand? Well, this part of Energy and Climate Change did some research, it's about 5 years ago now, and they found that 50% of people surveyed did not believe that climate change would actually affect them in their lifetime. So they wouldn't see anything. They know something's probably going on, but they'll be dead and buried before it actually affects them. And only 18% people believe that climate change would affect during their children's lifetime. So most people don't believe that their children, actual people that they know, they brought into the world, will be affected either. However, 74% of people said they would make changes if they knew that climate change was going to affect them or their children. So there's a lot of positives there. That's where it comes back to that education, 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 because it absolutely does. Climate change is affecting people now, our children and our children's children. And of course, if we're asking people to make changes, we need to ensure that there's a clear and holistic organisational policy directed towards climate change mitigation. Occupants, building managers, members of staff are not going to be engaged when policy's conflicted. There's no point asking people to recycle more if all the lights are being left on. Now here's some examples. I did a lot of work with London Underground over a few years as part of sustainable development. Actually, they are the biggest energy user in the whole of London. They use an awful lot of energy, and really it was all about trying to reduce their energy consumption. And during the time that I was there, I did a lot of surveys at stations, and I come across typical things like this. As you can see, it's a sign, official looking sign. It's been put on a word processor, so it must be official, and it's been put on some air handling equipment, telling people not to turn it off. This is no natural ventilation in this building, so don't turn the air handling unit off. Keep it running constantly, 24/7, 7 days a week. And these are what I refer to as negative social norms. If a maintenance engineer has put this on, it's a negative social norm. And this is fellow workers. Someone's got a heater in their workshop and they've found it turned off, and in disgust they've put a hastily scribbled note saying, "Do not turn off this heater." And another negative social norm. This time not from people empowered, maintenance engineers, from your colleagues. So all these barriers create negative social norms. This is another example. London Underground, of course, have a lot of stations that are above ground. And you can often see, if you ever noticed, but you'll go through a station, you'll see all the lights on. And it could be a bright sunny day. Sometimes you have to stare hard, all those lights on. Why? Why are they not turned off? And it took me a while. I had to interview a lot of station supervisors and talk to them off the record in a comfortable manner to try and understand why they didn't turn the lights off. It's not a big switch that says platform lighting. They have to actually go into a switch room and flick off a miniature circuit breaker. But still, why weren't they doing it? Well, after a while, there was a common theme. I found out that station supervisors weren't turning their lights off because they were afraid they wouldn't come back on again. And then there would be a nice smooth shift handover. They would have to hang about. This was eating into their free time. There could be paperwork to fill out. So why would they do this when they could just leave them on? And of course, this negative social norm was created not by the station supervisors, it was a rumour that had escalated. LU management hadn't identified this, they hadn't accepted that this is a problem and removed the social barrier. Quite easy to do. Just explain, if you turn the lights off and they don't come on again, it's not your problem, it will be our problem. So this is a pro-environmental attitude. Does not lead to pro-environmental behaviour when the context is prohibitive. Important point. So what did I do when I was at London Underground? Well, of course, it's important, first of all, to engage, to have forums, talk about that education, do presentations like this on what climate change is, just dealing with climate change. Is it a fiction? Is it a fact? Having people to ask questions. It's not about talking at them, it's about having 360-degree engagement. And it's about identifying their behaviours that need to change. You can only do that by observing people and their natural behaviour. Then understanding and target those behaviours that we've identified, targeting them within the context of the LU environment. Having open discussions and that 360-degree engagement. And that includes, particularly with London Underground, the trade unions as well. This is an example of a process for an ESB, a typical LU above ground staff accommodation. I went in, I found some people from Spain, some people from the north of England, some people from the West Indies, all in a building. Some were hot, some were cold. What was happening was having windows open in one end of the room, heaters on at the other end of the room, and in the middle, air conditioning units running. This was due to different staff attitudes, because what should be the internal comfort level? Someone thought it should be 25 degrees, someone thought it should be fresh air coming in, someone thought it should be about 18 degrees. So it's quite clear what we needed to do. Staff who were cold, provided with fleece jackets. Openable windows were great. You can have cooling. Just open the window. Doesn't cost anything. And energy hungry, these horrible air conditioning units that will just run and run and run, were given only to the supervisor. We're told that when ambient temperature starts getting up to the 26 and the internal temperature starts getting up to the 24, 25 degrees, please do put the air conditioning on. Make sure the windows are shut though. It doesn't work well with the windows open. It's so important to remember, if you're going to deal with this, you've got to understand that only about 8 out of 10 people will ever be happy. There's always going to be two people that are going to be dissatisfied. This is from research conducted by CIBSE, the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers, 2006. So here's that flow chart. So we're educating, we're understanding climate change, we're identifying the target behaviour. Heating and cooling being used at the same time, that's wrong, that's target behaviour. Understand the behaviour in the context. It's not there being bad, it's not bad behaviour, it's because the internal comfort for a staff is a problem. We need to discuss that. What interventions are there? What can we do? Engagement and acceptance. Form that policy as part of environmental significant behaviour. Review, gain that feedback. Is it working? Here's some examples. This is not at London Underground particularly. This is, I think, one as a bank in Canary Wharf that was trying to deal with recycling issues. So all we did, we put different labels on all the bins rather than have recycle, non-recyclable waste. We actually explained to people what was going on. You can see there's a reminder of the problem here. This bin is for anything other than recyclable. So anything that goes in here goes to landfill. We're telling them that. We're trying to create a positive social norm. And we're creating positive social norms by removing barriers as well, putting lots of these around so there's no problems. They can always find the right receptacle. Another way of creating good environmental significant behaviour is in a meeting room where air conditioning was provided by split DX units. You've got internal unit, external unit outside, and these things were being left on continuously. Even sometimes 10 o'clock in the evening, we're finding these units on. So we couldn't rip these out, we couldn't put a whole new trend system into building management system. We had to deal with this at a behavioural level. So we gave them the controls and we spent just a couple £100 on some temperature monitors, just some thermostats they could see to register the temperature. And we told them exactly what the temperature should be. We asked them to understand that. We tried to give them information as well that having this air conditioning unit running was like boiling 2 kettles constantly. And it worked. People understood it was there for them, but not to misuse it. And these are some other ways, some really bad ways of ESBs I come across. This was the same bank in Canary Wharf actually that had this awful idea of going around every time someone knocked off work and left their computer on, they would put this label on their keyboard, very authoritarian. It doesn't create a positive social norm, doesn't remove barriers, and it creates resistance. People don't want to be insulted like this where everyone can see them coming in on a Tuesday, Wednesday morning and finding you've got this insult on your keypad. So just to summarise then, feedback reviews ensure that ESBs are always rewarded and seen to be rewarded. If someone is doing something, if someone's turning lights off, if someone is recycling, appoint them as a green champion, say you've got a passion for this, we would like to appoint you as our green champion within the organisation. We'd like to make you a subject feature in our website or on our staff magazine. We can also create meaning and motivation using metering or display energy certificates as a way of showing people that their actions have actually created positive results. The last 6 months we've saved 10% in energy, that's great. And continue to promote new behaviours to strengthen positive social norms. That's facilitating ongoing discussions. Don't let the ball drop. Continue that going. Continue that discussion.